Information is not going to be transmitted with a flight plan, but it is kept for emergency purposes. It's like for search and rescue information. So starting with number 19, next to the E, where there's E and a slash, this is where you put the total fuel available in hours and minutes. So we're going to assume that we have 5 hours and 20 minutes of fuel. So we would put 0520 for our fuel. 5 hours and 20 minutes of fuel on board. Next to that, there's a P, and this stands for the people on board the airplane. How many people do you have on board? This is where you would put the total amount of people on board. So we have just 2 people in this example, and that will complete that. So remember, this section is more for search and rescue information. So we have the E, that stands for the endurance, for how much fuel we have. We have P, for that stands for how many people on board. Now we have R. This is for the type of radio, emergency radios you have available in your airplane. Now we have UHF radio, VHF radio, and ELT. If you have an ELT, you would leave that marked. If you have a VHF radio that can transmit on 121.5, you would leave that in there. But most planes, most small planes do not have a UHF radio, so we would put an X through that. So this is showing we have R, we have radios on board, and these are the 2 types of radios we have. The survival equipment section is not required in the ICAO flight plans. To use this section, you would put the letter S in the first box to indicate that you have the specific survival equipment on board, and then put the first letter of the item listed that you have, such as P for polar, D for desert, M for maritime, and J for jungle. So right here, if we had any of this survival equipment right here, we would put an S right here, and since we don't have any of that equipment, then we're just going to put an X through it right there. So if we had some of this equipment in here, if we had desert equipment, for example, we would X out every one of the things that we don't have, and we would leave, and this would have an S in it, and we would leave desert there. But since we don't have any of the equipment here, we can just X out the very beginning where the S would go, and that leave that the way it is. The jackets section refers to life jackets. Now, this is also not required for domestic ICAO flights. To use this section, you would put the letter J in the first box right here, just as we talked about. But since we don't have any of this equipment right here, we're just going to exit out again. If we did have it, we would mark J, we would cross off the ones we don't have, and we leave the ones showing that we do have. The dinghies section is also not required. This is where you would put the number of dinghies you have. Dinghies are like life rafts. And the capacity of the total of them, whether they're covered or not, and the color. So if we had a dinghy here, we would put right here, we would put the number of dinghies. If we had 3 dinghies, we would put a 0 here and a 3 here. And the capacity is a total capacity of all the dinghies. So if each of the 3 dinghies can hold 3 each, then we would have a total capacity of 9. And you would put a C here if they're covered, and if it's not covered, you would exit out. And we'd write down the color here. Because we don't have any dinghies, we just have to X out the D in the beginning here that specifies dinghy. The aircraft color and markings section is just like you would do in any airplane, where you write down the basic main color of the airplane and then secondary colors, and that would go after A for the aircraft color. So if we have a white and red aircraft, and if it had gold stripes, you can even write gold stripes and leave it like that. The remarks section after the N right here, this is remarks where you would put notes about the survival equipment. If we don't really have any survival equipment to talk about, and we don't have any notes or don't want to put any remarks there, we would X out the N there, showing that we don't have any notes in that section. And the last section is our pilot and command section, where we would put our pilot and command. All right. And that just leaves the last line where it says filed by, accepted by, and additional information.